another chapter on mini DRS matter and some important updates. Let's dive into everything now. Hello, pole position news viewers. Welcome to another video. We have another update to talk about regarding the Australian Grand Prix. A lot has been happening in Formula One lately. Let's begin today's video with the following. Vasseur, Ferrari's team principal, spoke about their performance in Australia, which everyone agrees was much lower than expected. Even those who weren't expecting too much from Ferrari were somewhat surprised by their performance. Ultimately, the SF25 faced some technical issues, and Ferrari made strategic errors. As I've mentioned before, I don't see a problem with taking risks, but of course, it didn't pay off this time. Vasseur pointed out that the track conditions, with the first two sectors dry and the third wet, complicated decision-making. There were also communication problems between Hamilton and his new engineer, which were pretty obvious to everyone. Hamilton and his engineer nearly had an argument during the race, with some rather blunt remarks being exchanged. Meanwhile, Leclerc was joking about the cockpit flooding, but that's another story. In the end, Vasseur's message is that Ferrari will essentially start fresh in China, and that the true Ferrari hasn't been seen yet. According to him, Ferrari still has a lot more to show, and I think it's fair to say that based on their preseason performance and what we saw from them in Australia, there's definitely more to come. As I've mentioned before, Australia is a unique track to start the season because teams don't have street circuit data yet. So, Australia becomes the first race where teams only have preseason data from permanent tracks. Then, they head straight to a hybrid track, part street, part permanent. That's why the Australian Grand Prix often produces results that are a bit different from a norm. Maybe Ferrari's result was different than usual, but of course, we'll have to wait for China to see how things unfold. Do you agree with Vasseur that track conditions played a big role and that we yet to see the real Ferrari, or are you holding back a bit? Let me know. Moving on to McLaren, we have some interesting information. Andrea Stella, the team principal, explained that Verstappen closing in on Norris toward the end of the race was due to Norris having significant damage to his floor, which caused a noticeable drop in performance. Stella mentioned that he didn't know the exact performance loss for Lando Norris when he gave the interview. When he refers to exact numbers, he's talking about downforce points, a metric that varies between teams. For instance, McLaren might use 10 downforce points, while Ferrari or Red Bull might use different amounts, depending on the specific units and proportions they use to develop their cars. At the time of the interview, Andrea Stella didn't have that precise data, but he said that the loss of power was significant, which helps explain why Norris slowed down during that part of the race. Stella also noted that the drier the track, the more McLaren tends to pull away from its competitors. So naturally, in the wet conditions at the end of the race, the gap was smaller. This performance in Australia is already making waves, as usual. People are now asking, can McLaren be stopped in 2025? I think it's too early to say, especially when you consider that last year Red Bull dominated the early races, and then McLaren appeared out of nowhere, delivering strong results. So it's too soon to draw conclusions from just one race. However, McLaren clearly stood out as a favorite even before the season started. But now, the questions are starting. What's being said? McLaren has impressed their rivals, especially in tire warm-up and management. A potential advantage for McLaren might be in this area, because we all know that tire management is half the battle in Formula One. If you manage your tires well and keep them at the right temperature, you're already halfway toward a good result. If McLaren really has a car that's not only fast, but also able to manage tires effectively over longer stints, we could be looking at that half-second difference the F1 pundits have mentioned between McLaren and other teams. McLaren might be able to maintain a consistent, fast pace while its rivals struggle more with their tires. This is definitely something to keep an eye on, and rival teams aren't ignoring it. Let's shift gears now and talk about the mini DRS. You might recall the mini DRS issue, and it seems that the FIA wasn't too happy with what they saw in Australia. According to reports, the FIA is set to introduce stricter regulations in China because they were displeased with the teams after the Australian Grand Prix. In Australia, they set up cameras and conducted stricter tests, and every team passed, but the FIA thinks that some teams may have bypassed the rules. As a result, they plan to reduce the tolerance of the rear wing slots from 2 millimeters to half a millimeter in an attempt to make it harder for teams to cheat the system. The FIA is clearly not satisfied with what they saw in Australia. Everyone passed the test, but the FIA felt that teams may have found a way to get around the rules. It's not exactly clear which teams the FIA is focusing on. There's been a lot of talk about McLaren, for example, but I'll offer a counterpoint. If multiple teams are already using the solution, it's not new. The FIA knows teams have been bypassing the rules for a while and will likely continue to do so. This creates a gray area, because if the test passes, technically it's legal. It's that gray area. So why not just allow it, instead of try to restrict teams for something that boosts performance? It can help make the grid more competitive, and everyone already knows how it works. It's no secret. So why not just let teams use it? Does it really cause such a big issue in the regulations? I don't think so. If necessary, they could ban it for next year. In case you've forgotten, the mini DRS works by allowing air to pass through a small gap in the rear wing, generating more speed without losing aerodynamic pressure or affecting cornering ability. It seems like a smart and innovative solution. But if the FIA wants to restrict it, let's see how it plays out. The next race in China will be a sprint weekend, so we can expect a busy weekend ahead. Let me know your thoughts on all of this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. See you in the next video.